Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to the race reaction stream for the 2019 Chinese Grand Prix and the 1000th World Championship event. And what a race that wasn't. All that hype, and that's what we got. I mean, there were some good, interesting talking points that we're going to go over. I'm going to be joined by Stuart, aka Chainbear, in just a few minutes to talk a little bit about it. It's just a reaction stream. Proper review will be out tomorrow, as always. Interesting. Some good stuff to chat about, like I say, but I'm going to start by going over the race results. I'm going to say it's spoilers, by the way, and all that. It's quite obvious, but I'll say it anyway. Lewis Hamilton took the win, his 75th Formula 1 victory, I believe, for Mercedes in what was a dominant performance. Yet another 1-2 finish. The first time since Williams in 1992 that a team has won 1-2s in the first three races. Perfect start pretty much for them, apart from the fastest lap. Sebastian Vettel in third place for Ferrari. Not the best strategy. Surprise, surprise from them today. Max Verstappen in fourth place. Charles Leclerc very disappointed in fifth, with Pierre Gasly in sixth. He did get fastest lap as well in that bonus point. He was the last driver, on the lead lap of the Grand Prix. Behind him, Daniel Ricciardo in seventh. Started seventh and finished seventh, so a good solid race from him. Pretty comfortable, to be fair. Sergio Perez, really good drive to make his way back up to eighth place. Pretty good in defence as well in his battle with Kimi Raikkonen, who was ninth. Again, another good drive from him, 13th to 9th. Alex Albon, though, pit lane to points. Fantastic performance from him, all the way up to 10th place. He finished just ahead of Romain Grosjean. Lance Stroll in 12th place, started 16th, so made up a few positions, but not great. Overall for him. Kevin Magnussen said after qualifying yesterday he was worried about the race pace of the Haas, and it kind of proved that really. Down in 13th place for him. Carlos Sainz 14th was involved in a first lap incident with Kvyat and teammate Norris. We'll talk about that shortly. Antonio Giovinazzi in 15th, George Russell 16th, Robert Kubica 17th, and then your DNFs, your three non-finishers. Lando Norris, he pitted. He had all sorts of damage after the contact on the first lap, and so pitted towards the end to retire. Daniel Kvyat did the same, and Nico Hülkenberg retired fairly on in the Grand Prix, I think it's fair to say, with some mechanical problems. Second time in a row that he's had to retire with mechanical issues, so not good at all at the moment for Renault. A bit of a sloppy start for them, I think it's fair to say, so far this season. I'm sure they'll get themselves sorted, but not a great start at all. But that is your race results. I'm going to now head on over. Let's see if we can do this. First time doing this on the new PC, so hopefully, because I didn't think to check all this before I went live. Good morning, Stuart. I can hear you. The stream can't, though, so bear with me for just a second. You'd think I'd have sorted this out before, really, but obviously not. Try that one again.
Hello. I'm just going to keep talking for a little while so the stream can react to my voice being louder.
I think you're there. You're showing up on my OBS.
Great. So hi, race 1000. What a classic.
Yeah, but I mean, brilliant. What else can you say? I mean, that was see, I hate using the term boring. Because as we had today, there are always some interesting points to pick out, but I think not a classic was probably the best way to put that. Were you? No, I'll tell you what it was, actually. Somebody said it in the chat to the race stream. Anticlimactic.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's tricky arbitrarily pinning all your hopes on a nice round number race. There's been a lot of build-up. We've been building up since probably about halfway through last season with this countdown. But yeah, a little bit anticlimactic. China can go either way, can't it, with an exciting race. Last year we got a good one, partly due to a late safety car and a switch to soft tyres. But, even though it's not one we're probably going to be replaying years down the line in a classic race watch along, there are some points that came out of this race that are going to be sort of interesting to discuss in terms of setting up the rest of the season, I think.
I was just going to say, we'll talk about Ferrari in a bit, but certainly down there, that's given us some question marks over their plans for 2019. But we'll start with the winner, as we always do. Mercedes, is dominant the right word? Pretty dominant from Lewis Hamilton, comfortable out front. Got the start right, had problems in Australia with his start and in Bahrain, but he nailed it here, got ahead of teammate Bottas and kind of never looked back, really. Bottas, there was a slight, tiny chance of a threat from Vettel, I don't know how much of that was us just hoping something was going to happen. But there was a tiny chance towards the end that Vettel might be able to come back in. But the Ferrari just never looked like they had the pace. And Mercedes, like I say, dominant today. And I know it's only race 3, but it is a bit ominous for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it was funny this. I mean, pre-season, there was a lot of talk about Ferrari, looking the stronger team. They didn't really show up in Australia, but then in Bahrain, they were, the dominant presence, problems aside. And we thought, well, this is the kind of Ferrari we're going to see, especially at tracks like Bahrain, which China has quite a lot of differences characteristically, but it's more like Bahrain than it is Australia. And, Friday practice kind of made it look like they had the edge. They definitely had the straight line speed. And Hamilton as well was struggling right through Friday until sort of the second half of qualifying, wasn't really looking as present as Bottas had been. So for him to take the lead and just sort of run with it, it's Hamilton, so not a massive surprise, but maybe not what we were expecting from this weekend. Bottas did say the paint on the track affected his start. He said it affected him on the warm-up lap and it affected him again on the real race start. So disappointing for him. That whole side of the grid actually suffered a little bit. But never really looked like he was going to bring it to Hamilton. There was a slight bit when the first pit stop changeover came, but other than that, seemed happy to sit in second place.
Yeah, it was strange. It's funny you say about Hamilton because he said after qualifying yesterday that he was still tweaking. He was still experimenting during the session to try and get his car in the right place. So even through qualifying, he was struggling with the balance or the setup of his car, and then he goes off and does that lap in Q2 on the mediums that caused people sort of asking the question, well, surely it was the softs and not the mediums. He delivered that lap time and then he's gone on and dominated the race. I can't fault Mercedes today. I think you pointed out there, the only slightly hairy moment for Hamilton was when Bottas pitted first. But I think although Mercedes do tend to give the lead driver priority on track, I think they made the right call there because there was a slight threat from Vettel and Verstappen behind. So I think they were right to bring Bottas in first, but he came out a couple of seconds behind Hamilton, then went and build that gap again. I have a feeling we still haven't seen the true pace of Mercedes. Cue fanboy comments, but I've got this horrible feeling, or not this horrible feeling, but this feeling that they've got out front today, so they've been able to turn things down. I think in Australia, Hamilton turned things down, and Bottas will have done so while he was leading. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out if they didn't have everything cranked up in Bahrain when they thought Leclerc had got it in the bag, to be honest. So I don't think we've seen the full pace yet, but I think we've got a good idea of what the pecking order is. But Ferrari certainly are not the team to beat going into this season, as we thought after pre-season testing, and indeed after Bahrain, because it looked pretty comfortable in Bahrain. Frankly, they should have won that race, and it really ought to have been a 1-2 for them. So a lot of question marks down at Ferrari, but that's taking nothing away from Mercedes. They got the front row lockout on Saturday. Hamilton got the start he needed. They dominated. So is there anything you want to add on Mercedes? I know it's a bit of a short conversation about them, but it was just a typical Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas, Mercedes race, really. Controlled and comfortable.
Yeah, there's not much you can add. As you sort of said in the intro, they've got that record. Well, not record, but 3 1-2s in a row, which hasn't happened in F1 since 1992, or 3 1-2s in the opening races, rather. Of course, they shouldn't have got that in Bahrain. Ferrari kind of threw that away one way or another, with Vettel getting a bit clumsy and Leclerc's car failing underneath him. But it's really given them a huge margin over Ferrari, and I'm not entirely sure how much pace Mercedes have in hand, or whether Ferrari are still looking to unlock their setups in a way they haven't yet. But having that points advantage really gives them a lot to play with. I think we're going to see a lot more clarity over the differences between Ferrari and Mercedes over the coming races. The opening races can be quite tricky to sort of judge where everyone is. But I don't think we've seen the last of Ferrari. I think, like you say with Mercedes, I think there's still plenty to unlock in that car. And I think there's a lot to be said. I think we're seeing narrower setup windows this year. I think these simplified aerodynamics have made it a little bit trickier to find the sweet spot in these cars. So I think that's why we're tending to see, even among the individual drivers, their sort of pace and potential fluctuating all over the place.
That's an interesting point on setup, because Ferrari had that issue in Australia, among other things, didn't they? Some balance issues. But actually speaking, I was watching the Sky coverage afterwards. Nico Rosberg said on Ferrari that he's hearing that they're in the wrong aerodynamic window, and they're looking to get a bigger rear wing on the car as quickly as possible, but it's not ready yet. So it could be that Ferrari might have to just suffer a little bit until we get to Spain and they can bring a B-spec car. I want to talk about the pecking order if we've got time a little bit later on, but we'll get on to Ferrari. Like I say, not a huge amount we can add on Mercedes. It was just, I don't think anybody in that team put a foot wrong. Hamilton was dominant. Bottas was very good, did everything he needed to do. Comfortable 1-2. Strategy was spot on. Just kind of what we've come to expect over the years. But Ferrari, on the other hand, team orders, question marks over strategy. Actually, a strategy, Stuart, that's quite reminiscent of last year with Kimi Räikkönen. If you remember a year ago, they left Räikkönen out long, didn't they, to try and hold up... I can't remember, was it a Mercedes possibly, or a Red Bull trying to hold somebody up, and then that kind of compromised his day. But not a good strategy call from Ferrari, in my view. What about the... we're talking with hindsight here, we have to remember this, but do you think they made the right call with the team orders?
Yeah, hindsight is 2020, isn't it? Looking back, I think the thing was Ferrari were on the back foot and they had to try something. It looked like Vettel might have had the pace in hand. And I think looking back, it just was that Vettel was in Leclerc's toe. He was able to pick up DRS every lap, so he was able to stick with Leclerc. But once they swapped positions, he didn't really pull ahead. He made a couple of mistakes, of course, which didn't help. But if it turned out Vettel, did have a few seconds in hand, or could start to make his way up towards the Mercedes, things could have been a bit different, and they could have scared Mercedes into, pitting earlier than they needed to, something like that. So they had to try something. It didn't work out, and further down the race, they ended up continuing to sort of compromise Leclerc to bolster Vettel's position, is what it looked like, which ended up sacrificing a 3-4 for a 3-5, but it's still early days. I think, I can't, it's very disappointing. And I think, Leclerc shouldn't have come fifth, but I think Ferrari had to try something. But I don't think whatever they did, they could have got to Mercedes today.
It's like you say there, on hindsight, we look at it now and we go, it was the wrong decision because Vettel didn't pull away. But at the time I said in the race watch along, it made sense from a Ferrari perspective because it did look as though Vettel was being held up. Obviously, that wasn't the case once he gets out in front. But then in that situation, they can't then really go and swap the drivers back around again because then they're just losing more time. And I think they spent too much time messing around with that. But I tend to agree with you. They weren't ever going to get up to Mercedes. But all of that compromised them big time because that allowed Max Verstappen to trigger the undercut. And he got the move on Leclerc. But the fact that Red Bull were keeping pace with them is where the big question mark is for me around Ferrari, because like we say, in Bahrain, they were comfortable. And in testing, they were comfortable. I know testing doesn't really mean anything, as we're seeing once again this season, but in Bahrain, they were easily the fastest car. It looked like we were going that way in FP1 in China, and then it all kind of fell away after that and never really got going. They didn't have the pace in qualifying, and then all of a sudden you've got Max Verstappen managing to get the strategy right with Red Bull and split the two Ferrari. So it was quite a weird race because Red Bull didn't look as though they had the pace, yet still managed to get Verstappen up there in fourth place and between them. But the problem with the strategy for me with Leclerc, and I'm hoping you or somebody in chat or somebody in the comment section afterwards can try and explain this to me, but to leave Leclerc out at the first stops for about 5 laps after Vettel had pitted, and then bring him in after losing all that time makes no sense to me whatsoever. If he's going to lose that time and they're only going to pit him 3, 4, 5 laps later, they may as well bring him in as soon as Vettel's pitted, sort of the lap later. If they leave him out for 10, 15 laps, then fair enough, then it kind of makes sense because you're pushing for a 1 stop. But if you're still going to 2 stop, why lose all that time by leaving him out when he wasn't ever going to hold up anybody after those first stops? Why not just get him in, get the tyres on, and then give him a shot at finishing fourth?
My only thoughts around that, I haven't heard confirmation from Ferrari or anything, is if he came in early, he would have had a shot at attacking Verstappen to get to fourth. That's all he would have gained. He would have gained the potential to sort of match Verstappen on tyres and sort of take him on for that position. Leaving him out, gave them the opportunity to take advantage of a safety car, which is exactly what happened to like Dan Ricciardo and Red Bull last year. If something had happened, Max would have been in position to get in and out, crack some, maybe soft, maybe medium tires on, and suddenly be on fresh tires without being, 10, 15 seconds behind the leaders. And it could have been hero hour for him. I imagine that's the only reason, other than giving Vettel a tow for one straight. Other than that, that would have been the only advantage they could have gained from it, which, if that had paid off, that would have looked incredible. So that's my thoughts around that. In the end, it looked like they just completely hung him out to dry on NAF tyres for way too long. But, had a safety car come, they could have looked like heroes.
Do you know what? I'm always praying for safety cars when we have sort of these quiet races, but I never even thought they could have been for the safety car. That makes complete sense. Like you say, they don't look like absolute strategical legends if they got that one right with Charles Leclerc. I mean, the second stop, when they left him out to hold up Valtteri Bottas, from a Leclerc perspective, that's a bit rubbish. But from a team perspective, that kind of made sense because it did allow Leclerc to back Bottas up a little bit and gave Vettel an outside chance of being able to maybe split the Mercedes. So that made sense. It was just the first one didn't really work for me in my mind. But now you've said safety car, that makes complete and total sense in the end. But still, I don't think they were particularly brilliant on strategy today, Ferrari. And on the team orders, for anyone just tuning in, I think we all kind of seem to be agreeing that with hindsight, it probably wasn't the right call. But at the time, it did make sense for them to make that switch. So yeah.
The safety car's always something you've got to keep in the back of your head when you're making strategies. And that's the reason that Mercedes, did a second stop. They probably could have easily covered off Vettel and Verstappen, sticking with the one stop with the pace they were on. But, had a safety car come out, they would have had both of those cars right behind them on fresher, softer tyres. So, yeah, you just got to bear in mind that if a safety car comes, it can really screw up where you are on the race.
Yeah, were you surprised to see Mercedes take the risk of double stacking?
I mean, I was kind of surprised. I mean, they clearly did the calculations quickly enough to know they could do it, but that was a late call for quite a risk. But again, they had enough margin in hand to sort of pull it off. I know Leclerc sort of slipped between them temporarily, but yeah, they didn't have too much to lose. Had they got it slightly wrong, it would have been a second or two, but that wouldn't have affected Bottas too much, I don't think.
Yeah, there's always that risk with double stacking that you get a sticky wheel and then both your drivers are compromised, aren't they? And the race flips on its head. But I suppose that they didn't maybe really want to see Bottas maybe come under threat from Verstappen and Vettel at the same time. They didn't want Bottas to take the win from Hamilton because that would have asked all kinds of questions then. So it was surprising that they took the risk, but I can kind of understand it from their point of view. Red Bull today, not bad. I think Verstappen will be very happy with fourth place. I think he drove well. Great scrap with Sebastian Vettel briefly at turn 14. That's super late, almost Ricciardo-esque into the braking zone at the hairpin. Lockup went wide, unfortunately. Super good wheel-to-wheel stuff. Complete opposite to what happened last year at that corner, of course. But didn't quite have the pace to take on Sebastian Vettel for that podium. But I think Red Bull, on a track that is very much a power track, with that long back straight, I think they can be fairly happy with fourth place for Verstappen. And to be honest, despite everything going around on social media asking questions about Gasly's future, and Sky were talking about it as well, I don't think sixth is terrible for Gasly. The problem for Gasly is the gap. Now, I'm not talking, obviously made a third pit stop, so you can easily knock another 25 seconds off that time, but he's still 30 seconds down the road from his teammate at least. That's huge.
Yeah, and I think it's, we know Gasly. We know he's not a slow driver. We know he's got pace in him. We saw him last year and we've seen him in junior formula. I think it's clear he's not quite synced up with his car yet in the way Max is. I thought this was a good race for Gasly, all in all. Compared to the first two races, he was on a worse strategy. He did have to start on the soft tyres. And it's the problem with this, like having the top three teams like significantly better than the rest of the field is it's really hard to kind of judge how far off the pace Gasly was on that different strategy because the top five cars were all started on the mediums and pulled away from everybody. but it was hard. It's hard to know whether the mediums, just in general, were a faster tyre to be on for the majority of that first stint, because you'd think the soft tyres would be a faster tyre for at least a little bit. Gasly was unable to keep up with the top 5 on the mediums. Does that speak to Gasly, or does that speak to the strategy he's on? It was tricky. He was definitely sort of in a different race, and I'm glad to see he was able to have the opportunity of doing a late pit stop and going for that fastest lap. He's clearly got pace in that car. I think he did the best with what he was given today. He's clearly not at Verstappen's level right now, but I'd be interested to see how much he can make up this year and how much he can get on top of the.
Yeah, I suppose the argument as well is if he was quicker, he would have been on the medium tyres in qualifying and wouldn't have needed to be on the worst strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it sort of speaks a little bit to Gasly that they can't yet trust him to go on to the onto that harder tyre for qualifying and guarantee he'll get through to Q3.
Thing is, I still think Red Bull are the third team. So 6th place is the minimum where Gasly should be. So kind of in my head today, although a long way off his teammate, not quick and wasn't particularly brilliant, did get the extra point for fastest lap, as you said there. But 6th place is kind of the minimum he needs to be doing, and that's what he did today. So it's a bit awkward. If you just look at positions, you'd say, that's all right for Gasly. But then when you look at the gap, that's when the big question marks start to really float around. But I think early days for Red Bull and Honda still. I think that car and that power unit is going to develop quite a bit this year, and they could be threatening. What I will say on Max Verstappen, though, is he's having the start to the season that we all were saying towards the back end of last year he needed in 2018, because if you look at his second half of 2018, if he'd done this last year, he could have been a title challenger. So if Red Bull continue to develop their car and Honda can get that power unit where it needs to be in terms of power, and then he can carry this form on and continue as he did at the back end of 2018, he might be a threat towards the end of the season. Might. A lot of ifs and buts there, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the exact thought. He's there, isn't he? He's there and thereabouts. Even in the races, he's he's been right there, ready to capitalize if any of the top teams have any problems. He's amongst it. You're absolutely right. The Red Bull are the third team at the moment. They're sort of not expecting wins, but they can grab podiums, they can grab high points, and if they stay close enough and can develop that car and can get the most out of the engine or make some significant chassis and aero upgrades throughout the year and bring the game later on in the season, who knows what they could do. It's going to be really interesting to see. Clearly, they have finally got a Honda engine that can do things. It's not as good as the other engines, but it's not hampering them as much as it did sort of McLaren and maybe a little bit Toro Rosso last year. I think they're in a good place. I think they're not where they want to be, but I think they should be happy that they're in a solid platform to develop on.
Yeah, what are they, 20, what's that say, 21 points behind Ferrari and already 40 up the road from Renault. So they're looking good for third, which is kind of, I suppose, a minimum they want this season. But I think they're looking very good. Actually, very quickly on Renault, before I get on to, because I do want to talk about the first lap incident with Kvyat, Sainz and Norris in a moment, but just while we're sort of running through the order, if you like, might just do it for the top 10. Daniel Ricciardo 7th, started 7th, finished 7th, kind of a bit of a lonely Grand Prix for him, to be honest. He was never really under threat from anyone behind, got a good gap to those behind quite early on, never challenged those ahead, was a lap down, which will frustrate him, I'm sure, but an important 7th place, I feel, for Daniel Ricciardo after what's been a bit of a difficult start to the season. So I think he'll be happy with that, and I think that's probably where Renault are really anyway. Just a shame about Nico Hülkenberg and a mechanical issue. I don't know if you've seen what that issue was yet, Stuart. If they've said anything, I'll check Twitter while you're giving your views on it all.
Yeah, I hadn't seen anything by the time I plugged my microphone in about Renault. They still hadn't given any information. Maybe the chat knows. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think Ricciardo, he needed points. I think he needed a boring race. I think he just needed a race where he could solidify some kind of position. It's clear, he's got pace. He's a strong driver. We know this already. That Renault, not quite where they want it to be right now, especially reliability-wise. We know they had to swap out all the MGUKs in all their power units this weekend. It's a shame Hulkenberg's still having some problems, but glad to see Ricardo getting some points on the board. It'll be interesting to see if they could start moving that car forwards a bit. They're equal on points with Alfa Romeo at the moment, thanks to Raikkonen having a great season, which you might talk about in a minute. But Renault had a nice fourth position in the championship last year, but they've got to be looking backwards at about 3 teams at least, as I think we predicted before the season started.
Yeah, are you concerned by their reliability, Renault? Or do you think these are just, are we going to call them early season teething problems?
I mean, yeah, I'm a little bit, because it's all power unit related, you've got to be slightly concerned because, you've only got a limited amount of elements you can carry through the year. So they've already replaced quite a few of them, or quite a few, the MGUKs. You just got to hope they've got on top of that and they can make the rest last for the rest of the year. So, you've got to be slightly concerned. They're in a Renault works team and they've got dreams of winning championships and winning races. And you would think kind of by this point, they're kind of should be at the high end of their consolidating their whole operation and start working their way up. And you don't want to have a sort of a year where everything starts to go a little bit wrong. You kind of want to start solidifying where you are and powering on to challenge the top teams, which right now it's not looking like they're doing. And if they're looking backwards towards Alfa Romeo and Haas, then yeah, if I were Renault, I'd be disappointed with 2019 so far.
Yeah. Maybe this is a harsh statement to make, but I think what's bailing Renault out at the moment is that Haas don't seem to be where they need to be either. Really, I mean, Kevin Magnussen, very good start to the season. That appears to be the raw pace in that car. But after qualifying yesterday, Kevin Magnussen was very much sort of saying not quite so confident on the race. And they never really looked like they had a lot of pace. I mean, all right, Grosjean nearly nicked a point, but that's only 1 point when Ricciardo's coming home 7th. So what's possibly just helping them out a little bit is that Haas aren't where they need to be. But that midfield fight is going to be, as we've said so many times, and as we've seen in this first 3 races, is going to be so close. So many different drivers are going to have the opportunity to score points, and that therefore means the teams will as well. And that could leave Renault in a mess come the end of the season. And they might look back at these first 3 races also and say, if we got it right from day one, we would have been a comfortable 4th. A little bit like Haas were last year in Australia. When you look back at their season, they would have been much closer to 4th place without that failure in their DNF. So I think they could come to rue this come the end of the season. Renault, in my view. I will finish off the top 10 quickly before we get to that first corner incident. May as well see as we're sort of running through it. Sergio Perez, fantastic drive from Checo, Stuart. I'm not going to lie on that one. Deserves a lot of credit. Was he 13th to start with? Bit of a brilliant start. I was so surprised on the race watching on to see him up in 8th place by about turn 4 or 5 or something stupid like that. So really good drive from him. But then at the same time, Sergio Perez, am I really surprised he does this?
Yeah, he did he was one of the, as along with Ricardo, he did a one stop, as noted in the Sky commentary. Perez really good at keeping those tyres alive for a long time. So he just got his head down, got on with it. That great start put him in a good position, and he was able to just, keep it for the whole race. Maybe a little bit lonely for Perez at times, having to hold off Raikkonen at the end, but yeah, can't fault him. And Racing Point really, again, I mean, we're seeing a lot of teams where they really need to get as many points as they can at the start, because lots of them, Haas, as you mentioned, Renault, struggling to get the best out of their car at the moment. I think this comes back to the maybe some of the setup difficulties we're seeing kind of across a lot of the teams, where they're really struggling to find the sweet spot for their cars. So yeah, good, more points to Racing Point. And Perez can only be looking forwards.
Yeah, I think Racing Point will come good as will get better as the season goes on. We saw that when they were the sort of Force India name, and it's the same team, of course. So I'm quite confident for them. But I think he drove really well. And actually, Ricardo, Perez, Raikkonen, and Albon all making the one-stop work. Kimi Raikkonen P9. Actually, Perez can't have been 13th because Raikkonen started 13th. He was somewhere around there. But Kimi Raikkonen P9 probably gave us most of the action on track today. See, every time the picture, the TV, which I want to talk about as well, the TV coverage was shocking today. But every time the TV coverage did bother to go and look at the midfield, it seemed to be Kimi Räikkönen either trying to hold somebody off or trying to overtake. But again, like I said about Perez, it shouldn't be surprising to see Kimi Räikkönen going 13th to 9th because it's kind of what he does, and Alfa have got some very solid pace. So I think he can be very happy with that drive. Absolutely, a lot of people gave him shout for driver of the day, but for me, I'm giving away what I'm saying later. My driver of the day, 100%, is Alexander Albon. Pit lane to points. I keep using that phrase, but that's exactly what it was. Made the one-stop work. Despite his tyres being pretty much shot towards the end of the race, still managed to hold off Grosjean, despite having a Honda engine versus a Ferrari as well. Excellent drive from Alex Albon. Excellent.
Yeah, really, really impressive stuff. And again, TV coverage didn't really see him that much, and it was only if you sort of kept your eye on the timing wall that you noticed he was actually solidly making up positions. Made that one stop work, but crucially made it work with a long soft stint at the end, which is why he was a little bit shot, but was able to hang on to those points. Did 19 laps on the soft tyre at the end there. Really impressive stuff. Probably only could have done it with the lower fuel loads. Yeah, looking really good. It's going to be interesting to kind of identify your rookie of the year at the end of the season, because if you have races like today when Albon had a terrific race, got driver of the day, but we didn't really see him, we've got to make sure we're noticing people like this and that the teams themselves are noticing Albon having good days like this to make sure he can get into good seats if this is the kind of pace we can expect from him.
I mean, I don't want to be. I don't want to do the whole. I told everyone so. But I did say before we came into this season, all the hype was around Norris and Russell, and nobody was talking about Albon, and anybody that did was sort of like, oh, he'll be no good. And he's showing that he's got it. That's 2 consecutive points finishes again, despite starting from the pit lane. And people were saying after Bahrain, I mean, rightly so. Norris deserved a hell of a lot of praise every single bit of it that he got in Bahrain for that drive to 6th place was brilliant. Definitely one of the rookie performances of the year so far, but people were saying, oh, Norris easily rookie of the year, but Albon, I agree with you, Albon will be one of those that slips under the radar a little bit, so I'm going to make sure I pick him out a bit this season, even though I'm probably going to get loaded with fanboy comments. But to be honest, if I'm going to be a fanboy of a Toro Rosso driver, there's probably worse things to be. It's not the end of the world, but
the fans picked him as well, so at least he didn't slip too far under the radar. But yeah, you're absolutely right, we've got to keep an eye on him. I don't think Russell's going to get noticed anytime soon.
No, poor guy in now Williams. But sticking with Toro Rosso, Daniel Torpedo Kvyat in China involved in an incident. Who would have thunk it? Turn 6, I believe it was. He's coming into the corner. Looks like he got on the onboard a bit of oversteer. Gets sort of pinched in there with Sainz, or he kind of pinches Sainz. There's a little bit of contact. Maybe Sainz a bit ambitious on the outside. That causes Kvyat to then make contact with Norris, who gets a bit of air. Quite not lucky the car didn't roll. It looked like it was going to from the onboard, but not quite enough contact there. Drive-through penalty. I mean, it did destroy the McLaren's races, but Norris and Kvyat both said they thought it was a racing incident. Most pundits on TV are saying racing incident, apart from the odd one. Carlos Sainz didn't really say it was a racing incident, but didn't really say that Kvyat should have been slammed for it. He did say that it's the first lap and people need to think about the long race, and did make reference to the fact that his teammate finished 10th and maybe he should be looking at the fact there's 55 more laps, which I completely get. But drive-through, first of all, I think that's a first lap racing incident. Secondly, drive-through seems a really harsh penalty compared to what we've seen in recent races and we saw last season. Usually that would get slapped with a 5-second time penalty tops.
Yeah, I thought it was incredibly harsh, and especially a lot of people going back to calling him the torpedo. What do you expect from Daniel Kvyat? I thought that was harsh as well. It definitely wasn't a torpedo move, which is normally that kind of very late braking, slamming into the side of someone kind of move. If anything, he maybe drifted a little bit wide on exit. He said himself he didn't lose control of the car. He was just trying to take a normal exit out of that corner. He didn't feel any understeer or oversteer. There were 2 McLarens on his outside. One of them was off the track, which you can't really account for. And what happened was he bumped into Sainz, and that kind of made him lose control of the car, and that's when he sort of fishtailed a bit and destroyed both McLaren's front wings. I would say it was a racing incident. I think it was just, there were quite big consequences, unfortunately, for what was quite a small incident. If he'd have been, a little more alongside, a little less alongside, they may have just bumped wheels or, bumped into side pods, and no damage would have been done and everyone would have carried on. As it happened, it just tipped Kvyat into an unstable car, and he bounced into both of them. So yeah, harsh penalty. I think very unfair for a lot of people to be jumping on Kvyat like he was an out of control madman. Hopefully the stewards will give some clarification, but they're not normally one to rescind penalties they've already given, or at least act contrite about it.
I mean, there was oversteering. He did open the steering up a little bit, but then you've kind of got to correct your car. I've not seen Sciences on board. That's the problem with doing these watch-alongs. I do tend to sort of miss some of the replays. I've not seen Sciences on board, but maybe was Science trying to avoid Norris coming back on track? Should Norris have maybe been a bit more... Well, no, because he's got to come back on track, hasn't he? What's he supposed to do? Pull over and let everyone through? No, Sean. I'm just trying to think if maybe he could have been a bit more cautious going back on, but I've not seen the sights on board, so I probably shouldn't say too much on that one. But I think drive-through, what's that work out at? I think Mercedes on their website, 17.8 seconds, so 18 seconds pit lane lost time. And when you consider we saw penalties last year that were well into the race, were worse than that, and drivers were slapped with a 5-second time penalty or a 10-second time penalty, it seems incredibly harsh for a first lap incident. Had that happened on lap 30, I think probably, he maybe could and should have got something, but that's that early in the race. 20 cars through those first few corners, there's going to be contact.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's particularly harsh, because especially with precedent, because stewards tend to look at the first lap as very different to other laps in the race, because cars are all over the place. Most of the time during the race, you don't have two cars to the left of you, two cars to the right of you. You've got a little bit more to maneuver, and you can allow your car to drift wide. You're a little bit more flexible in your driving, and there aren't four cars in your blind spot. Yeah, I mean, if I were a steward, and I'm not, I'm a steward, I would have just given him a time penalty if I was going to give him a penalty at all. 5 seconds in the pit stop, slap on the wrist. If that, I mean, I wouldn't have given him a penalty, but if I was going to have to give him a penalty, that would have been it.
I was actually just going to ask, would we be having this conversation if he got 5 seconds? I don't think we would. I think it is the fact it's a drive-through that's got people so confused. It's been a while since you've seen a drive-through as well, hasn't it? I'm trying to think back to the last one. I mean, you look at like Grosjean on Leclerc in the US last year. Was that a 5-second time penalty or something like that? And that was well into the race, and that was just a completely stupid, out of control Frenchman, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, God, you're asking me to remember things. Don't ask me that. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, that's part of the reason why they did introduce these other penalty systems, like a 10-second and 5-second added onto your pit stop, or your time at the end of the race, just because drive-throughs did seem a little bit harsh as the kind of minimum in-race penalty you can give. So maybe the stewards will reflect on this, and even if they don't admit it was a bit harsh, they might sort of adjust going forwards to make sure they don't over-egg the pudding again. And you're right, we probably wouldn't have had this discussion. We might have been like, Kvyat, a bit clumsy, but 5-second penalty seems fair. That probably the way the discussion would have gone then.
I think, looking at replays, the only clumsy part I could really see was him opening up the steering. But if your car's got oversteer, understeer, whatever, you've got to correct that. Because the last thing he needs to be doing is then spinning or losing complete control of his car, because it could be even worse. So I've seen people on Twitter talking about him steering into people. He's not steering in, he's correcting his car. He's opening the steering up. But I think Carlos Sainz said that as well. He didn't need to, but he's got to do something to correct his car. I just think first lap incident. But we'll not talk about that anymore, because we could bang on about that for quite a while. We've kind of touched on Haas a little bit, but no pace again on a Sunday. It just seems to be... They've got the pace in the car. They've nailed a Saturday, but where the points are handed out, they can't seem to to deliver on the race pace, which is quite odd because Haas were pretty good last year across a whole weekend. So I don't know what's gone wrong there for them, but very disappointed to see Grosjean only 11th, although very close to the points, and even more disappointed to see Magnussen not only 13th, but despite starting ahead of Grosjean. What a good look at the timing now, 6, 7, 8, 9 seconds behind him. So quite surprising because I felt after Australia, and to a lesser extent, really, but still after Bahrain, that they were fourth, that they were the best of the rest.
Yeah, there's something very strange going with Haas. They haven't really explained it in too much detail. On the one hand, they, as far as I'm aware, have got both cars into Q3 every event. I think that's right. But just can't keep it together over a race distance. Could be a number of things. It's really strange to see, and I'm hoping Kevin Magnussen isn't having one of his years where he's sort of only half present. They don't seem particularly happy. They know they're able to deliver in that one lap pace, but you're right, as you spoke of earlier, they come out of qualifying being like, yeah, we're in Q3, but I'm not feeling it. Don't count all your chickens yet. And this all, as we've spoken about, kind of melds into this really weird battle for fourth place where none of the contenders have really fully got it together, apart from maybe Alfa Romeo, who are sort of just able to pick up points by being sort of solid but unspectacular.
Yeah, it's anybody's game, that fourth place. I'm just looking at the times to try and see if there's an explanation around Haas, because the lap times aren't too bad. But what I would say is they did make the second stop, whereas sort of the last 4 places in the points are one-stoppers. But Albon was 12.5 seconds behind Raikkonen, so Magnussen down in 13th was, 21 seconds off, so he may not have got into the points either. But Romain Grosjean, without the second stop, probably would have been 8th. So I suppose that might explain that on Grosjean's front, who appeared to have some good pace today. But Magnussen, I don't think that would have made a lot of difference at all. So quite surprised there. But could this be linked to Ferrari? There was some talk on the Sky post-race coverage that Martin Brundle felt like, I think he said something along the lines of they've got power that they're not able to use, whether that's for reliability concerns or they can't just use it in that car. If that's a problem with the Ferrari power unit, then perhaps that's rolling on to Haas. But then flip that over, that doesn't appear to be affecting Alfa Romeo. So it's really, really unsure what to think about Haas this season so far. They've kind of surprised me in a bad way, quite disappointed with them. But we did see, didn't we, actually? We were doing the testing streams. Reliability was a concern for Haas.
Yeah, that is true. They, that first week of testing that we sort of covered together, they took a little while to get a good amount of laps on the board, despite the old hashtag better than Red Bull. But actually, yeah, if you're actually testing as well, they were, their fastest laps each day, were pretty solid. That's why they were coming out with this better than Red Bull sort of game on Twitter, because they were finishing the day with a better lap time than Red Bull. But again, they weren't getting in a good number of laps at first, and here we're seeing race pace. They can't put in consistent pace compared to the cars around them. Once again, we're only in race 3. We're still in the flyaway, so upgrades are few and far between. And we have seen, especially in the midfield, a lot of changing through the middle and end of the season. So, this isn't over yet. It's still very tight. And because, the midfield tends to pick up fewer points, the gaps between them in the championship tend to be smaller. So you can make a lot of gains later on, even if you struggled in the beginning. Luckily for Haas, Renault are struggling, Race of Point are struggling as well in their own way.
I guess super quickly on the last, we've not talked about Giovinazzi or Williams. So Gio, 15th, 2 stops. Again, I think Alfa got his strategy wrong. He seemed to really be struggling towards the end of his first stint on those tyres and was getting past left, right and centre. He was like in Australia where he ended up as a bit of a cork in a bottle, didn't he? And that's not great. I think Gio's another driver that's getting quite a bit of unnecessary stick. It's his third full-time Grand Prix, if you like. He did a couple Was it last year or in 2017? But this is his first full season, and it's his first 3 races in that car. So I don't think it's been awful. And he's up against one hell of a teammate in Kimi Räikkönen. But he's one that might need to start just maybe booking his ideas up a little bit. I think he'll get time. He'll get time at Alpha. I don't think he's going to come under the pressure that Gasly will if he doesn't start picking up, like you said, around the British Grand Prix time. But I don't think you said that at all. That was on Sky. Sorry, I'm just putting words in your mouth, Stuart. You know what you're saying the other day. But yeah, how do you rate Gio so far this season? A bit of a quiet race, and I just feel like he's been done over a little bit by strategy twice.
Yeah, he's again one of those drivers that sort of you can easily miss that he's there. He's incredibly hard to rate, and the concern is, I know this will hurt you particularly, but there's a concern that he'll get Van Dorned. He's in a smaller team. He's got a world champion, really quick driver as his teammate, who's making that car probably look better than it is. He's only got a few races under his belt. And with a smaller car or a less fast car, trickier to find the most pace out of it. Raikkonen's got hundreds of Grand Prix experience in how to tune the car, race the car, get the very best out of the car. He knows the tracks. He's a much better, much more experienced race driver. So again, I wouldn't want to count chickens yet. I think he needs to have some landmark races at some point. We need to see him wheel to wheel with some cars around him, making some overtakes, getting points where he maybe shouldn't have. But maybe not on race 3. Maybe we need to give him time to find his feet. So I'm not massively concerned yet, but as we've seen at the moment, there's actually a lot of competition for these seats. Formula 2 and Formula 3 are getting a lot more of the spotlight nowadays, so we kind of know who's raring to step up. So when you're in one of these small seats, you are always looking over your shoulder and kind of hoping you're not kicked out as soon as you're put in. I hope that's not the case, but that's the concern we've got to worry about with these rookie drivers.
Yeah, absolutely. Stoffel Van Dorn, by the way, we've got a podium tomorrow. I didn't yesterday. Sorry. Wow, I have to tell the future. Van Dorn is on the podium tomorrow. He's not even racing, but yes, yesterday didn't do a dance at all. I promise. Very quickly on Williams, because I want to put the question to people in a moment about driver of the day, and then I want to talk about the shockingly bad TV coverage, in my opinion. On the sort of shockingly bad. Williams, 16th for Russell, 17th for Kubica. Russell 2 laps down, 68 seconds behind Giovinazzi. Jesus. And Robert Kubica, 16 seconds further back, 2 laps down. Only made 1 stop as well. Russell said after qualifying he felt like the team had made progress. 68 seconds off your nearest contender, is that progress? Really?
I think the numbers say they've made progress. I know this is really distant progress. I don't have the things in front of me, but on outright pace and looking through practice and qualifying, the sort of percentage difference, the fastest cars, they have made up some ground, albeit a small amount. I don't think they're expecting much out of this year. But if all they get out of this year is climbing back up towards everyone else, then I think that'll be a success. I hope they get into an opportunity to get some points. But again, another race. The only good thing about them being so far off the pace is they don't have to worry about getting into scraps with other people. They can run the cars as fast as they like, learn as much about them, try not to trip over each other. I don't think there's sort of an in-team rivalry between Kubica and Russell at the moment. I think they're working very hard to just get as much out of this car as they can. They split the strategies, so they got plenty to learn there. Russell had the excitement of falling behind Kubica by taking a second stop and then overtaking him again. So that would have been a nice highlight for him. They are in no man's land. And I think they've just got to get their heads down and work really, really hard at making up that gap. But I don't expect anything from them this year.
I like what you say about not having to worry about having to fight other cars, because I suppose, what's the old saying? To finish first you must finish. I don't expect them to finish first, but if we get a crazy Baku race and they stay out of trouble and we get a few retirements, then a cheeky 10th place is on the cards. And at the end of the day, they've kept themselves out of trouble and would deserve that. A bit like Lance Stroll in 2017 kind of kept himself out of trouble and and picked up that podium. So not predicting podiums and wins for Williams, but, places, crazy races, maybe a cheeky point here or there. But I'll throw it to chat first and I'll come to you, Stuart. But in chat, one surname, who was your driver of the day? Do let me know in there. I'll do some shout outs on Twitter as well. What are you saying, Stuart, for driver of the day?
While I understand where you're coming from with Albon, I'm going to give it to Raikkonen because he entertained me the most. Every time we cut to him, he was in some fight. I've been very entertained by Raikkonen for most of the season. Actually, he's really thriving in the midfield. So I'm going to give it to Raikkonen. He had a great day. He got some more points for Alpha once again.
Yeah, completely understandable. I mean, Checo deserves a shout, definitely for 8th place as well.
That's true.
But I've got to go Albon. I can't not. Had that been 16th to 10th, probably not spectacular, but to do it from the pit lane is solid. And he got some overtakes done. He said they were boring because they were all on the straight. He wasn't very happy after the race with that. Felt like they could be more exciting, but he did everything he needed to do, nailed the strategy, looked after his tyres. And I think for a rookie, third race in Formula One, he showed he's got the maturity to fight for position, not make contact, and he's also got the maturity to look after his tyres. So Albon all the way for me. Chat look like they're going that way. Danny Rick says Lewis Lewis. Yeah, Lou. In chat says Danny Rick. Perez and Albon says Motorsport Tube. Kimmy for Kovic, he said the same. The formation lap was better than the race, says JJ Trainer. Well, I thought we were going to get an amazing race because people struggle with tyres. Max Verstappen spun and Kvyat spun. That was bizarre. That was very bizarre. But yeah, that was a moment. But we might talk about that in a moment, actually. But I always butcher his name. I always get this wrong. Kiriluminati over on Twitter says Vettel because he defended well. Danny says Christopher Albon. Good shout on old Chris. Alex Albon. Johnny says Alex Albon. Hans says Kvyat because that incident was the only thing that was interesting. Oh dear. Albon for Stephen S. Miles. Christian says Sergio Perez. Welsh Toe says Albon. Saints, Alex, Kenzie, Kelvin, Young, Jeff, Strolley all saying Albon. Perez says Jack. Gasly says Morgs. Okay.
Can't vote Albon, can you? Yeah, strong support for Albon.
Yeah, it seems like, well, that's the way the official vote went, didn't it? So I think it's looking like Albon. Kimmy and Chris says Tim. I would need to stop saying Chris because people will be tuning in going, what's he talking about, Chris? He don't know anything about Formula One. It's something from testing. I said Chris Albon for some reason completely by accident, and I still don't know why. It still makes no sense why. But a few agreeing with you on Kimmy, so good shout then. It looks like, just looking at chat. See, this is the thing. Jay in caps there says Hamilton. He drove flawlessly, absolutely flawlessly, and dominated the race. So he absolutely deserves a mention in with all those driver of the day names. I don't
feel like Hamilton had to pull out something extra the way Albon did, though.
No.
He was Hamilton challenged? Did he stretch himself, or did he take the lead in the first corner and then was able to kind of control things? That's the difference, I guess.
Yeah, that's why it's sometimes difficult, I find, giving sort of race winners who have been quite comfortable the driver of the day, because they've just controlled it, haven't they? It's a good point. I think people will pick Hamilton because it was a pretty dominant race, got the start he needed to. But I think when you look at Albon, Raikkonen, Perez, they absolutely deserve to be mentioned. But I do want to talk about TV coverage quickly before we disappear, Stuart. I was really disappointed with it today. I thought it was all focused on Ferrari, which is fine because that's where all the team orders were and that. But there was action in the midfield, which I think is what's made this race seem more, in air quotes, boring to some people, because obviously we watch on TV and what we're seeing is two Ferraris over team radio talking about their strategy and team orders, when we're missing Albon making overtakes, Grosjean trying to close him down in the final laps, trying to get past him. We didn't see any of that. We didn't see Perez's overtakes. We saw a bit of Raikkonen. He was the only one we really saw in that midfield. So I was really disappointed. And whoever they employed, I'm ranting, oh my God. Whoever they employed to do the start-finish straight camera, they need to sack him. Shocking.
Yeah, on that camera, I mean, my gut instinct is that, the cameraman or camera person knows what they're doing and maybe there was something wrong with the equipment. Someone on Twitter mentioned to me they thought the feeder light was broken on the camera, so they never knew when they were live. So they were having to adjust on the fly. God knows what was going on with there, but it did look very amateurish, didn't it? But on the focus of the race, yeah, you're right. Very disappointing, and not what we're used to in modern F1. I think in the last few years, the broadcasters have realised there's a lot going on in the midfield, and they can tell that story. And we used to seeing them, focus on the battles that happen a bit further down, showing the timing graphics, so that we're, well aware that Grosjean is closing in on Albon or whatever. Yeah, really strange to see that. I mean, I understand why they focused for a while on the Ferrari sort of air quotes controversy or the developing story there, but it would have been nice to see what else was happening because, you're right. Albon had the race of his career so far, and we didn't really see it on screen.
It was a weird one because you think back to Bahrain, we saw all the midfield stuff. Australia, we did. There wasn't much happening at the front aside from the Ferrari, so it was quite odd. But on the cameraman, maybe he just fell asleep. And somebody in his ear kept going, start, finish straight. And had to keep swinging the camera around. I don't know. Was it that dull, the race, perhaps? But yeah, I was just really disappointed with it. When a Grand Prix is a little bit quiet, then at the front particularly, there needs to be a focus on that midfield. And generally there is. So it's just quite odd that this weekend, particularly with all the hype around it, with it being the 1000th race, I thought they'd have made... I thought the TV coverage would have been pretty much nailed on, and yeah, actually, I said 1000th race. It's not. It's the 1000th thing.
I'm so bored by that.
I know.
People try to nitpick how many races it really was. Nah.
Don't get me wrong. I like knowing the facts on that, and the actual number is good to know. And there are people that like to keep an accurate record, but I said in my preview, just let people enjoy it. Do you know what I mean? Just people on Twitter going, actually, I think you'll find it's not the 1000th race. Oh, I don't care. I don't care. It's the 1000th something to do with Formula One. It really doesn't matter. But were you, race aside, impressed with the stuff around the 1000th race, or are you disappointed they didn't do more with it? I know there's a lot of hype, but some of the stuff we saw on YouTube on the F1 channel, some of the stuff in the build-up show and over the weekend was great looking back at the classic stuff. But apart from plastering F1 1000 everywhere, it didn't really look like they did an awful lot from a TV perspective. Maybe in the fan zones and things, it was different. But for all the hype, I thought we'd have had a bit more around it. Although I will say, actually, very quickly, I will let you answer, Stuart, I promise. But I will say very, very quickly, it was good to see some retro, was it the Mobile logos on the Red Bull?
Yeah, the Mobile and the Esso were both old school, which was pretty cool. Maybe, I mean, and some drivers are doing some special helmets for the year. It would have been quite cool if there'd been a more of an orchestrated effort. Maybe allow them to sort of modify their liveries. I know there's tricky because there's sponsors and all that kind of stuff you have to dive through, but maybe just sort of I think they had F1 1000 stickers on all the cars, but apart from that, there wasn't really a kind of joint effort to do something visually spectacular. Yeah, they didn't do much for the TV, but there was actually, to be fair to them, a lot sort of around it online. They've been building up to it quite a while. They've been talking about sort of classic races, best drives, milestones and things like that. That's kind of interesting. And we've seen that not just on official F1 channels, but media sites sort of around the web. They could have done a bit more, but what can you add to the sort of official program really, other than maybe sort of adding some sort of visual flair, which they kind of left the teams and drivers to do by themselves. And some drivers wore retro helmets, and Red Bull stuck some old logos on. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what you could have done really.
Yeah, it was good to see most of the drivers getting involved with the retro helmet. I have to say, I'm going to say it again, I don't care. Daniel Ricciardo's helmet, I loved that. Keep it, Danny Rick. You're not watching. You probably never even know anything about this channel. But just please keep that helmet. I think it looked brilliant. It looked absolutely brilliant. Nico Hulkenberg's was quite nice as well. George Russell's Montoya tribute was odd. I mean, each to their own and all that, but yeah. But I'd love to have seen classic liveries, but that was never going to happen with sponsors, was it?
Well, perhaps not, but we had a long build up to the 1000th race. F1 could have started negotiating this, midway through last year. This could have been planned well in advance, in theory. I know it's kind of complicated, but still, yeah. George Russell's helmet, as far as I'm aware, is he used to race when he was karting in a sort of Montoya tribute helmet, and never actually, but which his brother also used to use, but he didn't realize for ages it was actually a Montoya helmet. He just thought it was a sort of a cool Arrow style livery, but when he was in karting, he didn't actually realize he was in a Montoya helmet. So that's why his helmet was half Montoya, is because that's what he used to race in karts.
I'm just staring at the Renault feed because they have just released Daniel Ricciardo's quotes for the race. So they might... Is that Nico Hülkenberg? Yes, it is. Let's see if they've said anything. Okay, then. So his full quote is, "It's clearly a very disappointing race for us today. It was a difficult start to the race. I lost a position and it was tough following cars ahead. We pitted and came out of some traffic, but then I felt a loss of power. We tried our best to fix it out there as it looked like a software issue, but it wasn't possible and we had to park up. We're looking into the issue, but it looks like an MGUK related problem." Oh, wow. So that quick fix hasn't worked at all then, has it? In his case, anyway.
That's very, very troubling. Meanwhile, Red Bull having a good season.
Oh, the irony. Yeah, wow. Sorry, that's an MGUK problem. I'll look more into that hopefully before the debrief tomorrow, get some more quotes on that. But yeah, loss of power and another MGUK problem at the moment on the face of it is kind of what Nico Rosberg is not saying that at all. Nico Hülkenberg is saying, so really troubling there. But we're going to leave it there because otherwise there's going to be loads of news breaking. I'll be here all night or all day. What time is it? Who am I? But thank you very much, Stuart, for coming along for this one. It's been enjoyable. Not the best race for the 1000th, but we still managed to talk for an hour non-stop about it. So there must have been plenty in there to keep us entertained, really.
Yeah, I thought it was, not a classic, but, plenty to think about. On a concluding note, I will definitely say I am intrigued to see what Leclerc does going forwards, if he might start to be a little bit more stubborn with his team, or think more about the long-term future. We shall see. That's going to be very interesting.
That's a tasty prospect. I think, like you said earlier, it settles up quite nicely for the season, this race has, so hopefully it'll be the one we look back at as the one that really got us going. But thank you very much, and I will probably talk to you shortly.
I'll talk to you soon. Have a good rest of your day, because it's only 11 o'clock. Got the whole Sunday left. Cheers, everyone. Goodbye.
Lovely. Thank you very much, mate. Thank you to Stuart. Thanks to you guys for tuning in. Thanks to everyone as well for coming on to the watch along. That was a tough one to get through without the live timing, and also not a huge amount to talk about. Renault, that's very quickly. A Cyril Beatball saying, unfortunately retired with an MGUK related problem. So it is an MGUK problem confirmed by Renault. That's from Cyril Beatball. So not good for Nico Hülkenberg. But yes, thank you for coming on for the watch along. Thank you as well. This weekend for everything, pretty much. It's been awesome. That is the watch along screen. There you go. The live timing, sod's law, is now working. I just wanted to have a quick look before we disappeared. That is so typical. But anyway, yes, I will be back tomorrow, somewhere between 4-5 p.m. UK time, with the Chinese Grand Prix debrief, and then there'll be another video up later in the week, and we'll try and go live next Sunday as well, and then we'll be building up to Baku, sometimes the race of the year. I think a few of you will look forward to that one, but in the meantime, you can follow me over on social media. Links to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course the Discord are all in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean, this has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.